and September 26th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Action item, proposed fiscal year 2018 water utility budget. Do you have a motion?
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion or questions? Seeing none, call the roll.
Commissioner Strelchuk,
Aye.
Commissioner Bushy,
Aye.
Commissioner Meyer,
Aye.
Commissioner Giral,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Schneider,
Aye.
Commissioner Nerbin,
Aye.
Commissioner Abendroth.
Aye. That's unanimous, and the budget is approved. Looking for a motion to adjourn.
Don't we have a
So moved.
motion to adjourn?
Can we get a second?
Second.
All right.
Motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
10-minute break.
I guess we have to wait till 7 o'clock.
Here.
Commissioner Meyer,
Here.
Commissioner Worth,
Here.
Commissioner Garrell,
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Here.
Commissioner Schneider,
Here.
Commissioner Nervin,
Here.
Commissioner Abendrow.
Here, we have a quorum. First item is the minutes of September 12th.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any questions or discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Next item is Resolution 3477, approving the 2018 sanitary sewer budget and establishing the 2018 sanitary sewer user fee schedule.
Move approval. Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is approved. Resolution 3478, authorizing the negotiation and execution of 13 easement agreements within the Maplefield Estates, Orchard Highlands, Ravine Farm, and Stone Creek Farm subdivisions for an amount not to exceed $106,660 in connection with securing access for the East Trunk Sewer Capacity Project.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion?
Aye.
Alderman?
Quick question.
Commissioner Worth.
As long as you have a half hour here anyhow.
Yeah.
What is the time, okay, I know this is part of the process in getting these truck done. What is your expected time period for getting the East Trunk Sewer District done?
Go ahead.
Or a sewer project?
The whole project?
Yeah, they actually have an East Trunk Sewer project. We started talking about it when I was an alderman last time, so that's 5 years ago.
2 years. So the first phase in 2018, we're looking to go from County Line along the railroad corridor to Zedler, and then over to Zedler across the freeway to Port Washington Road. That's anticipated through 2018. And then the second phase from Port Washington Road and Zedler up to Dunges Bay, over to Stone Creek. We anticipate that to go through 2019. So the duration is 2 years.
Doesn't it go further north than that, I thought?
The gravity portion is in 2018 and 2019.
Explain it I don't know what you mean.
The force main portion is maybe what you're referring to?
I'm referring to, when are we going to have sewer up Port Washington Road?
Yep. In 2019.
Okay. So it should, we then in 2019 could be talking about what we're doing along the I-43 corridor and some of the zoning things that we talked about in 2012.
You're talking about the extension of sewer north on Port Washington Road, north of the hospital.
So we do have sewer north on Port Washington Road. Another component of the project was what we were considering a relief lift station that would provide some additional capacity for a couple of our lift stations that in wet weather events see a high peaking factor or multiply significantly. The discussion was then that those would also potentially be sized for the growth or that east growth area north of Port Washington Road. But the project itself, the East Trunk Sewer project itself, would not actually serve the east growth area. Obviously, there has to be subsequent policy decisions about, number one, expanding the sewer service area to that location, as well as how it will be served. And that policy discussion will help cite where that lift station would be located.
When do we anticipate doing that, or do we wait until this is all done? And then we have that discussion for another 2 or 3 year process?
No, the idea would not be, the construction of the gravity portion, which is what we would consider the relief portion or what's going to provide the additional capacity for wet weather events, would really have to be done before MMSD would consider allowing us to expand our sewer service area. So that's what's underway, is those 2 phases of that project. We can then move forward with the discussion of where we'd look to expand the sewer service area that would obviously play into how much capacity we're going to provide, whether or not the commission wants to see sewer service all the way up to Pioneer Road, or whether we'd look at doing it incrementally, and then obviously there'd be choices along the way of how to serve it. Given the topography in there, we can't serve it with gravity sewer from the northernmost end to the southernmost end, and those options come with expenses as well. But once we have the gravity portion of the project underway, then MMSD and Sewer PAC should at least entertain the conversation of allowing us to expand the sewer service area.
And is there any way to, the 2-year process you're talking about, to make that faster?
For the construction of the gravity
Yes.
line, we're still working through that process, but logistically, it's a lot of large pipe, and there is consideration to the effect of all of the residents. And really, you have to build it from the downstream-most end to the upstream-most end. So even reducing it to a single contract wouldn't necessarily reduce the timeline. We're also trying to make sure that we're putting together the most cost-effective project. There's portions of this that would be tunneled or, not open cut versus the portions that are open cut, and that plays to different types of contractors. So we're trying to be sure that when we look at how to structure the contracts, that we're being the most cost-efficient for the city as well.
Well, I just hope, I think getting the lower portion, what you're talking about, the gravity portion done, is obviously very important for the people who live on in southeastern Mequon, and that's number one priority. But I hope we're planning and expediting the planning for doing the next section also, so that we don't get this done and then stop and have a year or two policy discussions and what have you before we get going on the next section, or we're really talking about years, a decade from the beginning of the time we talked about what should happen with the Port Washington Road corridor before we can ever do anything with it. That would be unfortunate.
Sure, and obviously part of the policy discussion will be with respect to how the city would want to expand. Traditionally, we're a build and contribute community, but that doesn't really apply when you're talking about an interceptor main of this level. So part of that would be how much sewer do you want to build on Prospect, or how much do you want to wait until development is here and ready to be constructed. Now, we could obviously move forward with expanding the sewer service area to at least allow for that consideration, but as you know from the budget discussion, that also comes then with capital costs to all of those properties. So
It's not the need to have that discussion. All I'm saying is, let's have that discussion with some anticipation of, instead of, now we've got the gravity done, now let's have that discussion, as opposed to timing it so that we're most expeditious in making decisions and deciding where we're going.
certainly, the East Trunk Sewer Project, as we've been calling it, included the force main and the relief lift station. We've just found in some of the hydraulic modeling that the solution to that might not be as straightforward as originally anticipated. So we didn't want to hamper any of the portion that we have to do regardless with that discussion. But hopefully, once we get the existing project out for at least the first phase of bidding, we can look at some of that modeling closer to come back with what the options would be in terms of moving forward, so that we don't have any lag time. But the gravity sewer would have to be built before we would do the force main and
Right.
relief lift station project regardless.
Thank you.
I have one question too. So do you know from these core samples already which portions of this project are going to be tunneling as opposed to open cut?
Yes. The samples that were taken are conducive to tunneling from County Line Road to Zedler, across the freeway to Port Washington Road, and up to Dunges Bay. There's only a portion of the project that will be open cut in Stone Creek Drive.
Okay.
That's proposed.
I also just want to commend you, Mr. Driscoll, for all of the work that you've done with this is in my district, and I know you've had a lot of conversations, and you've been very patient, because this is hard for people, even though it's under the ground of their property, and you've been very good at working with people in the community, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Alderman Bushy?
Quick question. On page 28, it talks about the restoration of the surface, and I'm just curious if there's any significant landscaping that homeowners would need to encounter in that process that you found, or is it just basically easy putting the grass back over there? Because it looks like it's under their obligation to do so.
The tunneling work, we've tried to minimize the impact to businesses, residents, property owners, and the traveling public by locating those work shafts in public rights-of-way or in public city-owned land, such as the Catherine Kearney Carpenter Park. There are locations where easements are required for the tunneling work. There is a portion in the easement where it talks about the grant, the grantor doing the restoration, and that's part of authorizing the negotiation, where depending on the terms of the easement, that can be negotiated as what is restored. One of those considerations include tree removal, where there's specimen trees, and the International Society of Arborists has a standard formula to determine the valuation for trees that are removed. So that's part of that consideration for compensation and that restoration or removal of that vegetation from that proposed easement.
Okay.
You've worked with Mike Guys on the tree specimens, and he's reviewed that as well?
Yes, that's correct. Mike performed the evaluation.
I know you did. Just asking in public. Thank you.
Commissioner Garrell?
Now, this is pretty much for the heavy rain, when you have the real heavy rain. Do you believe that this is going to alleviate the sewage backups that have been such a problem over the last decade or so? That's what this is primarily going to do?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, correct?
All right.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, Resolution 3478 is adopted. Moving on to Ordinance 1510, appropriating the necessary funds for the Mequon Sewer Utility District for the year 2018 for capital charge payments to MSD and City of Mequon capital debt service requirements and City of Mequon Sewer Utility capital projects. So
Move
sewer
approval.
budget.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the sewer budget. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Sewer budget is approved.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Motion and second to adjourn, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned.
We still have a 15-minute gap.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Common Council meeting for Tuesday, November 14th. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Roll call.
Alderman Stralchuk,
I'm here.
Alderman Bushy.
Here.
Alderman Meyer. Alderman Worth.
Here.
Alderman Garrell.
Here.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Here.
Alderman Urban.
Here.
Mayor Abendroth.
Here. We have a quorum. The first item is public hearings. Our first public hearing is Ordinance 1504, amending the city land use plan map for the properties located at 9715, 9731, 9749, and 9757 North Granville Road from rural industrial to residential 1 to 1.5 acres. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in September, and the first reading was at the council in October. Need a motion to go into public hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and second to go into public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Is there anyone here who wishes to address the council on this issue?
Move to close.
Motion and second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The public hearing is closed. Ordinance 1509, an ordinance adopting the annual budget, appropriating funds for the operation of the government and administration of the city of Mequon for the year 2018 and levying for the same. Recommended by Appropriations Committee in October. This is the first reading.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
Motion and second to go to public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are now in public hearing. Does anyone wish to address the council on the 2018 budget? Seeing none.
Would you close the public
Time
hearing?
has changed.
Yeah. Motion and second to close public hearing. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Public hearing is now closed. Item 3, citizens wishing to address the council on any matter not on the agenda may do so at this time. And we have someone who is registered, Miss Betty Nash. Miss Nash? Yeah, use the podium in front, and you have 5 minutes.
All right. I just want to see.
Can you
that
grab the
the
microphone
residents-
so we can hear? Just pull that closer,
Yeah.
please.
That the residents are aware that some of the people that they entrusted with positions of being aldermen are not working on their behalf. I'm a tax-paying resident of Mequon. I understand that our very competent police force is paid through my tax dollars and through fees added to other services that I use. The police were called to my home one time by my security company to check to see if a burglary had occurred. That was their job to do. Since I help to pay for police protection year after year without using it, why is it that when an occasion comes up where I could use what I've been paying for, you want me to pay extra for that visit? I believe that the police do a good job in their work, but the person who has pressed these charges on the residents, I just don't see as being someone working on our behalf. And I would personally like a listing of all the burglar alarms that you responded to this year and how much was paid for each one. I can't see a person being called having a false alarm. I feel that's a false accusation. I did not make an alarm of any kind. I was not at home, and it said that I have a first false alarm, and I owe $100 for that. I did not break any law, do anything wrong. Why is it that I'm asked to pay $100? Now, supporting the police department, I believe in that, but when it comes to false accusations like this, I don't believe in that. And I just don't really see that, especially after they said, well, it used to be not the first one, but other, if you kept having things go off and there was nothing happening, and you didn't repair that or something like that, then you'll be charged for it. Okay, well, that's something that might be okay, I don't know. But for something to happen, and there's been no warning to the resident or anything at all, and, well, your alarm went off, you don't know why, we don't know why, we don't know if anyone was trying to get into your home and, and set it off or anything, but you pay $100. To me, that's not feasible. And I just really can't see that as being something that was promoted by someone who had the best interest of the residents at heart.
Thank you for your comments, Ms. Nash. We'll go to public officials' reports. Mayor has no comments. City Administrator has no comments. We'll now convene as the Appropriations Committee and take up the minutes of October 17th.
Where are they in here?
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve the minutes.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the minutes of the Appropriations Committee. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Moving on to the consent agenda. The consent agenda includes Common Council minutes of October, Economic Development Board minutes of August, Finance Personnel minutes of September, Bike and Pedestrian Way Commission minutes of October, Park Board minutes of August, Planning Commission minutes of August and September, Public Safety Committee minutes of July, and Ordinance 1504, amending the city land use plan map for properties at 9715, 9731, 9749, and 9757 North Granville Road from rural industrial to residential, which was recommended by the Planning Commission in September, and the first reading was at the council in October.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, call the roll.
Alderman Stralchuk,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nerben.
Aye.
8-0, and the consent agenda is approved. Moving on to ordinances, Ordinance 1503, amending the city zoning code regarding residential use regulations in Section 58301, the town center zoning, and Section 58302, the arrival corridor zoning, and Section 58303, specific development standards. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in October, and it is a first reading. Ordinance 1508, amending the city zoning code to rezone the property located at 13460 North Port Washington Road from R1 Single Family 5 Acre to IPS, Institutional and Public Service, and amending the land use plan designation from residential 5 acre to institutional. This was recommended by the Planning Commission in October, and it is a first reading. Ordinance 1509, an ordinance adopting the annual budget and appropriating funds for the operation of the government and administration of the city of Mequon for the year 2018 and levying for the same. This was recommended by the Appropriations Committee in October. This is a first reading. And if we want to take this up, we need to suspend the rules.
Motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion and a second to suspend the rules. Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy,
Yes.
Alderman Meyer,
Yes.
Alderman Worth,
Yes.
Alderman Garrell,
Yes.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
Yes.
Alderman Nerben,
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Aye.
That's unanimous, and
6 ayes,
ordinance
3
1509 is before us.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve the budget. Is there any discussion? Alderman Worth.
I passed out 2 amendments that should be in front of each of you. It wouldn't change the bottom line on the amount taxed, and it wouldn't change the amount appropriated, but it would at least it's more of a placeholder on the two safety items that we discussed at the Appropriations Committee but never really voted on. And I put them out as two separate amendments, in part because people may agree with one and not the other. So I'd make my first motion would be that $75,000 in the Capital Improvements Fund, established in 2017, be moved to a public safety fund to be used for a new fire captain if hiring such a captain is later approved by the Common Council after consideration by the Committee of the Whole, or if not so approved or otherwise allocated by the Common Council to be returned to the Capital Improvements Fund.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion to amend the budget. Motion and a second. Discussion. Alderman Meyer.
I'm not opposed to it. My question is this the area to do that? As in the Appropriations Committee, we discussed that we would take a look at this and do this, if justified, changing money from a capital improvement fund to some other area, something that we can do at a later date. We don't have to do that in the budget.
Correct.
So.
Alderman Strelchak.
Is this appropriate to make another amendment, if I'd like to do so at this time? Or should we vote on the first amendment?
We have to vote on the first one.
Okay.
Anyone? Alderman Garrell.
I think it's a good idea to get this money over to where so it's ready to go, because I agree with both these amendments that we're looking at. In fact, I strongly agree with them. So I'm not going to tell you I'm going to vote, but I think you figured it out.
Alderman Nervin.
I'm in favor of the amendment. I think one of the big flaws with the way we pulled off the budgeting exercise at Appropriations Committee is we had a handful of things that we said we'd entertain, and we didn't really button up how we'd pay for them, be it from transfer from one fund to another, like this amendment suggests, or whether it's levying for it. I think it just left a lot of open ends and a lot of things to clean up later, which is really not the intent of the budgeting process. So I'll accept the amendment. When we vote for it, I'll vote for it.
City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council, and with all due respect to Alderman Worth, these two recommendations were included in a memo from staff to the Appropriations Committee last month when the budget was recommended for adoption here tonight. And while staff would fully support the inclusion of these items into the 2018 budget, we have not identified a funding source, per Alderman Nurbin's point, to pay for these ongoing, or at least the fire position, the ongoing recurring expense that would be associated with a full-time position with benefits. And in accordance with direction from the Committee of the Whole last month, as we reviewed the police and fire staffing analyses, it would be staff's recommendation for the public safety to review both the police staffing study and the fire staffing study in depth, and to provide a recommendation back to this body whether or not there should be inclusion of a position or positions in the 2018 budget, whether that begins January 1st or sometime thereafter. That would allow staff to identify financing options to pay for any positions that could be included in the budget, either going into next year or beyond.
And let me add that we created the capital improvements budget in order to have money available, because we're doing an asset, what do you call it?
Asset management plan.
Asset management study of all of our facilities, and we created that pot of money to be able to address those issues. Those are critical issues for the city. And so to take Rob Peter to pay Paul at the last minute is inappropriate. Alderman North.
Well, it's not last minute. This was raised at appropriations. And while I agree, this was that capital improvements fund, which, if you remember, was, I think, my idea.
Yes, it was.
was because this was urgent to get done in 2017. And it was so urgent that we didn't even get the study going until the end of 2017. While I think it's good, we shouldn't be appropriating, 2 years in advance, first of all, for something that we don't have plans for. That was appropriated to be used in the later part of 2017. Secondly, this doesn't say that we're going to hire this person. In fact, I'm not sure whether or not I'm in favor of hiring them ultimately. But I do think that there was a need identified. This says it has to get approved by the council before we do it, and it goes back in the capital improvement fund if we don't. But I don't want this just to be lip service that, yeah, we'll look at it. Now, I don't have a problem with a friendly amendment, changing it from the committee of the whole to the public safety committee, if that's what the city administrator is suggesting, that it should go to the public safety committee. That would be fine. But I think that having this in the budget at least indicates our interest in doing it. It's not a decision to do it. And in fact, it's very clear that it may be a decision not to do it, and the money might go back. But the idea of budgeting is to indicate your at least your aspirations for the following year. And there was, I thought, the majority of the council indicated some desire to do these things at the Appropriations Committee, but then it got dropped. So I with all due respect, I take some umbrage at saying this is last minute, and it's suggesting that, we're robbing Peter to pay Paul, or robbing Peter because, well, that's a bad analogy, but, we didn't use the money. And I don't think the government should sit with piggy banks. Now, would it be more appropriate to take it out of, we could have said this $75,000 came out to do the road project that we did put in the budget, and then take some of that other money and put it towards this purpose, which would have been perfectly appropriate because the road is a capital improvement fund, or capital improvement. This was simply this is a placeholder, and it's a direction by the council that we need to look at this and talk about it.
Yeah, just say, the minutes we just approved, regarding this item, a suggestion was made to hold a committee of the whole meeting to discuss the police and fire department staffing analysis prior to making any decisions. That was the Appropriations Committee's decision.
I don't think that was a decision, it was a suggestion.
We set money aside last time for the capital improvements to start that fund, even though that we didn't use that fund this year, which I hope that we would have, towards some improvements on it. That doesn't change the fact that funds are still needed. Just because it hasn't been used in this year doesn't mean that we're not going to need to have those funds. And so taking monies from that, I don't think is appropriate to do that, to do this. If we come up with the idea we're going to have an assistant chief, or a captain, and we need to hire that, that should be something that goes into the 2018 budget for it. The next budget for it, not for if we're going to have something happen, take it away from a fund that is already established for some need.
And we also took $350,000 out of the general fund reserves. That's a lot of money that could cover a lot of the things we talked about during the budget, and we didn't specify them. But we took that money and we actually put it into the DPW budget. But that money is available to cover these items, EAB issues, all the other things that we talked about during budget. Alderman Nervin.
But that money is only available if we don't do the road that we had set it aside for notionally, not definitively, in our budget discussions. So we've got multiple shells on the table, and some of them have nuts underneath them and some don't. I think this is trying to get a nut under each shell that we are thinking we're going to go do. Because if you look at all the things we said we want to go do and consider, the amount we budgeted for doesn't add up to that. It's short by I think 180,000, because those are the additive items. And we never got around to discussing the additive items one by one, and these are 2 of, I think, 6 items that were on that list. Maybe 4, I don't know. I looked it up earlier, I thought it was 6. 2 of the more important ones, I might add. So you have to get this from another fund, or you have to levy an additional 2 cents per thousand to get the 90,000, pay for it. It's got to come from somewhere. Just to say it comes from the 350 that we set aside from the general fund that was originally earmarked for the road we may or may not do, depends on a lot of things happening, and there's no definite course. If everything happens, then we're busting the budget by some number of dollars. I think that's why we're adding these things in the manner we are.
Any further discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
No.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins, Alderman Schneider,
No.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck,
No.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
5 ayes and 3 noes.
Motion passes.
And my next amendment is the same thing, but the $15,000 for the joint fire study.
Second. Motion and a second to take 15,000 out of the capital improvements fund, move it into, I don't think we have a public safety fund, but move it into the,
Oh, we're creating one.
we're creating one?
Created one a minute ago when we did the 75,000.
Is that true, Tom? Never mind. Okay. We have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrell,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
No.
Alderman Nurbin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck,
No.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
No.
5 to 3.
And that amendment passes. Alderman Stralcheck.
Mr. Mayor, one thing that I maybe wasn't completely clear on in appropriations is we have a seeded dollar amount of $340,000 going into road maintenance, which I think is fabulous. We needed that. There's some additional savings of $180,000 in state funds that we were deciding where to allocate, and there's going to be road-type items, meaning EAB and additional items. However, in the budget call-out, there's an additional $350,000 coming from the general fund going into the road maintenance reconstruction sinking fund that I would like to make a motion that we move that back out of the road maintenance. So my motion is I'd like to move $350,000 out of the road maintenance reconstruction sinking fund back into the general fund for the same reason that was being discussed before. We have several moving nuts, and all of them are moving, and there's not necessarily a marble under each one. Donges Bay Road has been highlighted as something that's important, but it hasn't been vetted that that's the road that we're going to do. I feel unless we're going to allocate the funds to roads, and we're going to agree as a committee to allocate all of those funds to roads, and we have projects identified for it, then it's appropriate to have that in the fund. If not, I feel that it should be moved back into the general fund, which we can shift back if a need comes forward when we vet these issues. We did not vet the level 3 roads through committee, and we have funds allocated for a project that we didn't agree to. So my motion is to move $350,000 from the road maintenance reconstruction sinking fund back into the general fund.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. A motion and a second. Discussion. Alderman Nurbin.
So I guess I understand the premise of the motion, but what it ends up doing is just taking the shell that has a nut under it now and taking that nut and moving it over to a different shell that doesn't have a nut. If you want to, if you really want to close all the gaps with what we did, Appropriations Committee, you got to levy approximately 4 cents per thousand, because all those projects that we looked at, if you assume we all want to do them, that's about 180,000. I don't see anyone wanting to do that. I guess we're presuming that we're going to go assess the road, and if we do the road, that is how we're going to pay for it, with the combination of the 350 from the general fund, the 180 from the transportation kickback from the state, and then whatever the leftover was from the capital improvements fund. That's what we talked about at the committee. What that didn't do was it didn't have a clear funding source for the 180,000 of additive items, which we said we were all interested in considering, but there was no clear-cut funding source for them. So,
Well, according to what's in the packet, it's pretty much dog-eared for Donges Bay Road, and there's not a lot of discussion about vetting several of the other items that staff came forward with. Prior to that motion coming forward to do Donges Bay Road, Alderman Garrell and I are sitting next to each other, and we're reviewing several of the staff recommendations, of which could be considered road appropriate. I just like an opportunity to vet where we feel as a council that money should go. If it goes to Donges Bay Road, and that's our priority for this year, that's definitely an acceptable fund to shift at a later date. However, I feel dog-earing at annual budget in the beginning of the year, it's going to be harder to move it out if we have another need somewhere else, or another committee comes forward with something else equally as important. And I don't feel we'll have the opportunity to vet that, because only one project will be in motion. And I don't feel that's appropriate as a council with taxpayer dollars. I feel it should be vetted properly, and I don't feel with the current system that it can be.
Alderman Schneider.
My understanding was that one of the reasons we did not fund Donges Bay Road outright was that there was going to be an assessment of needs to see if that in fact was the most pressing need road-wise, since we have a finite number of dollars to spend on it. And until that assessment is done, I think that's why we left it more open-ended. We have the money there, and if it appears that Donges Bay Road is the most pressing issue, then that would be the priority. At least that was my understanding.
My struggle is that we're still only under the umbrella of roads in this discussion. The general fund is available for several other items beyond just roads. This is moving it into a just roads discussion. We have to vote to move it back, or we have to use that dollar amount.
I think we can move it back if anytime. Is that accurate? Or?
It's going to be politically much tougher to do it at a later date.
We're doing the same thing we just did in reverse here. Alderman Worth?
No, the general fund is not available. I mean, it is, but we budget for the priorities we have at the time of the budget. Yes, you can change things throughout the course of the year. That road can't get done without at least one vote of the Public Works Committee and at least one vote of the council. It is but when you budget, you don't just leave, we don't just ever, we got a hunk of money and we'll leave it and figure out what we're going to do with it later. That's not what a budget does. A budget we allocated $500,000 to the road program. We did it on the basis, on the argument that that road was important. And that's what we said at appropriations. It very well could be that but we do that every year. When we're talking about a broader scale road program, we have a map, we don't ever decide specifically, but we do it based on the fact that there's a need, and we put the money in that bucket, or under that shell, or whatever our current analogy is. This is no different, other than I came up with the argument that that road ought to occur. I still believe it should, but it doesn't preclude us from doing anything else in the road program. And it doesn't preclude us from to say we're not going to spend anything on roads this next year, because you always have that option on every budget item, other than labor. I mean, so, there's certain things that can't come back, but, so this is simply saying, here's where we're putting it now, but it has to come back to this council before we ever spend it. All we're doing is allocating the dollars rather than just kind of, there's nothing worse than a budget that says, yeah, we got enough money, we'll figure out what to do with it later. That's not budgeting. It is And that's kind of what I walked away from the meeting, kind of saying, well, we're going to do some of this stuff. We're just not going to write it in the budget. I mean, we ought to at least earmark it. That's what a budget does. We haven't committed to doing anything other than personnel. And even there, we could get rid of people, as the year goes on. So I don't think we should raise taxes right now, particularly because we have not, all said that we're in favor of those programs. And besides that, I don't think we need to. But, yeah, we could put it back in the unallocated, undesignated reserve and have it sit there.
I would prefer that, and that's my motion. I just feel it's an argument to get it out of roads, if we need it for anything else. And I
You always can.
you can leave it there, and you can always move it if a project comes forward. It goes both ways.
I think we put it there because we're not borrowing for roads, and we didn't really have a lot of money for roads, so that was a safe place to put it because we might need it there. But we also thought that we could spend it on some of these other items once we had the opportunity to discuss them. But if you're going to take money out of the facilities fund to spend on public safety, then you might as well take money out of the road budget and start moving money under all the different nuts. And I don't think we should do that. I think it's more appropriate just to leave the money in the general fund. And we can decide as we go through next year which items are most important, and we have the money there. It's not allocated specifically for each of those things, but it is there and it is available to us.
I just feel it's a good, healthy committee, the whole discussion, and I think we could vet it out and have a real strong direction for the year if we leave it in general fund. And then, we can move to alter that fund allocation at any time during the year if we choose to put it into roads. I think it's just most appropriate in general fund until we have an allocated need for it and something that we've committed to do. We're just vetting it. We're just getting estimates. Staff came forward with a report that we didn't need to work on level 3 roads this year, that it wouldn't depreciate the level of the road and the amount of money the city would outlay over time. It was a wise savings for 1 year, yet we're trying to throw another $350 back into it. I think it should be vetted at council when it comes forward. I don't think it should just be sitting in a fund that's just allocated to roads when we have other things, including facilities reports and some, things that we could need it for throughout the year.
Any other discussion? Okay. We have an amendment. Call the roll.
Alderman Garrow.
No.
Alderman Hawkins.
No.
Alderman Schneider. No. Alderman Nurbin.
No.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
No.
Alderman Meyer.
No.
Alderman Worth.
No.
That motion fails. Any other amendments to that main motion? First and second? All right. First and second on the main motion to approve the budget as amended. Call the roll.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
No.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
7-1.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
It was 6-1 to tell that.
And the budget has been approved. Ordinance 1510, appropriating the necessary funds from the City of Mequon Sewer Utility District for the year 2018 for capital charge payments to the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewage District, City of Mequon capital debt service requirements, and City of Mequon Sewer Utility capital projects, recommended by the Sewer Utility Commission this evening. It's the first reading.
Move approval.
Second.
Would that be a motion to suspend the rules?
Oh, yeah, motion to suspend the rules.
Second.
Motion and second to suspend the rules. Call the roll.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
That's unanimous. Motion on the budget.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion second to approve the sewer utility budget. Any discussion? Wouldn't it be great if all budgets were this easy? Call the roll.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
8-0, and Resolution 1510 is adopted, or Ordinance 1510. Moving into resolutions, number 3476, authorizing a revolving fund loan in the amount of $50,000 to Bear Arms LLC, 9653 North Granville Road, in connection with the acquisition of capital equipment and the creation of 1.5 full-time equivalent jobs.
Move approval.
Second.
This was recommended by Economic Development Board and Finance Personnel Committee.
I
And
move approval.
Second.
motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Stralcheck.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
That's unanimous, and that's adopted. Resolution 3477, approving the 2018 sanitary sewer budget and establishing the 2018 sanitary sewer user fee schedule. This is recommended by the Sewer Utility District Commission.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Is there any discussion? Call the roll.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrell.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck.
Aye.
That's unanimous, and that is adopted. Resolution 3478, authorizing the negotiation and execution of 13 easement agreements within the Maplefield Estates, Orchard Highlands, Ravine Farm, and Stone Creek Farms subdivisions for an amount not to exceed $106,660,000 in connection with securing access for the East Trunk Sewer Capacity Project. This was recommended by the Sewer Utility District Commission this evening.
Move approval.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. We have someone who wishes to speak to this, Tammy Douge. And Greg, Tammy and Greg.
I will be brief, but I speak in opposition to the current proposal for the East Trunk Sewer District. In my opinion, the council is considering a proposal that maximizes rather than minimizes disruption to private property. My understanding is that there are other options that either did not involve or involve substantially fewer disruptions to private property. And we're obviously not doing that. We're now proceeding with a proposal that would involve 13 easements, 13 disruptions to private property, permanent disruptions to private property. And the issue is significant. Significant to me personally in that you're proposing to put a 48-inch sewer pipe within 43 feet of my house, over my property and within 43 feet of my house. But I think it's also the case, obviously that's a concern to me, but again, I think it's unnecessary. There were other options. I would have expected that a guiding principle of this council and of the public servants in this community would be to minimize disruption to private residences, minimize disruption to private property. And it seems to me that we're just not doing that. And so again, I would sincerely urge the council to look back at other options that are available, because they certainly would be more consistent with that guiding principle of minimizing disruption to private property and to the residents who've lived here for many, many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Douche. We have motion and second. Discussion?
Well, could we ask staff to respond, please?
Certainly. They both want to respond.
The comments made with regards to minimizing impact to the property owners, that was a guiding principle in the analysis and determination of the alignment that was presented previously to the Sewer Utility District Commission. The alignment that Mr. Duge refers to of 8 different options, that there was one option where there was 8 different options that were evaluated, and one option was at an angle from Catherine Kearney Carpenter Park going into an outlot at a skew angle that the railroad would not approve. And that's why that alternative was ruled out as being feasible. So minimizing impacts to property owners by tunneling as opposed to open cutting, minimizing impacts to property owners by locating work shafts outside of the public right-of-way that would impact traffic. Those were considerations that factored into the alignment and what was proposed and presented in front of the commission and what's been designed.
How deep is this, and what risk is there for a property owner?
It's approximately 30 feet deep, and the risk is minimal. One concern that's been expressed is the impacts to wells, where the research done on the well logs for the drilling shows the well depth at approximately 120 feet into clay, where the clay has low permeability. So that's approximately 90 feet of clay between the proposed pipe and the cone of depression from the well for a private resident of drawing that water. The concern with respect to risk was potential sewage exiting the pipe and getting into that water supply. The pressures of groundwater would more likely go the opposite way of trying to penetrate into the pipe as opposed to it exiting the pipe. So the risk is very low with respect to that.
Thank you.
Alderman Hawkins.
And the pipe is of what material?
We're looking at 2 different types of material. One that contractors have used in the past is reinforced concrete pipe with a fiberglass lining. A second pipe is a cementitious polymer, reinforced polymer. That's called a Hobus pipe. That industry typically uses on these those 2 types of pipes are typically used on these projects in the industry.
And the estimated lifespan of those materials?
The reinforced concrete pipe has a 90-year life cycle that's estimated, and that can be rehabilitated with a cured-in-place liner, which has an estimated life of over 50 years. Then the Hobus pipe has estimated lifespan that's longer than the reinforced concrete pipe and the cured-in-place liner combined. It's over 150 years.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Call the roll.
I'll-
Say one more thing. Come back.
My concern is that where this pipe goes, and nobody came out to my property that I know of to measure this. This pipe, there's a 25-foot easement that they're talking about putting this 48-inch pipe in. When I measure from the end of my house to the start of where that is between 31 to 43 feet, depending on where they put that pipe in that 25 feet of easement. That's a little too close to my house for my comfort, and I'm sure if any of you, and it only really affects our house, we are the lot 14 in Orchard Highlands, so we are in this corner lot down here, where my neighbors up and north, their houses are closer to the road, where this pipe is going to be at the back of their property. Our property, the way it sits, that is 31 feet right now from our house to the beginning of that 25-foot easement. That's not a lot of feet. If you stand in my yard and look at how close this sewer pipe is going to be next to my house, I am not comfortable with that. And I understand he talks about this clay and how it won't go through, and this pipe is supposed to last as long, but nothing is guaranteed. Who's to say that by disrupting that landscape under the ground, and depending on weather, dry weather, things shift, who's to say that that pipe won't crack for whatever reason? Nobody can guarantee it, and nobody can tell me exactly where this pipe is going to go in this 25 feet. And the first we heard about this was this summer when Mr. Driscoll approached us when we were standing in our yard this summer. That's the first we had heard about this pipe. And because of our house being as close, I can't speak for my neighbors because, again, like I said, their houses sit further from that pipe than ours. Ours is the closest. When you look at all those lots, our house is the closest one to that sewer pipe. It's a sewer pipe. And I am not willing to let this be. I mean, what happens if we do not sign these papers that tell us that they're going to give us money for this land or to use the easement, and they gave us a dollar amount and they showed us all the figures and how they did it and everything? I don't think that's enough money to put a sewer pipe that close to my house. And I'm sure none of you would want a sewer pipe that close to your house. And that pipe is 69 feet away from my well. And maybe it won't seep through the ground but you guys, nobody can guarantee that to me. Nobody can guarantee that that thing will not affect my well. I don't have city water, I have well water, and that my well is 69 feet from that pipe, and while it sounds like a lot, when you're in my yard, that is not. That is a close distance to that sewer pipe, and I do not approve of it being put into my yard. There has to be some other option that this can be done. And you're looking at me like I'm crazy. Am I? Would you want a sewer pipe that close to your house? Because you said this was in your district. Am I in your district then?
Yes.
And would you be okay with a pipe that close to your house? A sewer pipe, 48 inches in diameter?
Yes.
I don't believe you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Mayor, I don't know that this is appropriate. Back and forth.
People have legitimate concerns, and I know staff worked very hard on all these alternatives to try and find the most effective alternative and the one that impacted the least number of people to the least degree. But if you look at the maps, the sewer pipe has to go through this neighborhood in some way or fashion, and this was the most advantageous and safest way to do it. And unfortunately, it goes through the Dooge's backyard, and it goes through other people's backyard. And the alternative is to not fix the sewer system, and that's probably a worse choice. So, any other discussion? Alderman Worth?
Well, I would just note in a lot of communities where lots are smaller, there's no choice but to have sewer that closer, and they don't have problems from the sewer. You're not having open trenches. That's a big advantage over the way it's done in some communities. I don't know that we have an option. And while Nobody likes disruption of their yard. I didn't enjoy it when a bike path was put across my yard. I know it's a different thing. Sometimes you just, you know, the public has to fix the sewer.
Call the roll.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Alderman Worth,
Aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Nervin,
Aye.
Alderman Stralcheck,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
8-0, and Resolution 3478 is adopted. We will now convene as Committee of the Whole, and first item is to approve Committee of Whole minutes of October 10th.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and a second to approve. Is there any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Minutes are approved. Item B is consideration of offers to purchase a portion of the city-owned property located at 6100 West Mequon Road. And I will turn to Ms. Tollefson to update us.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm just going to provide a brief update and overview since our meeting last month. As you all recall, in October, the Council weighed in on a number of distinctions between the city's offer and Mr. Lazinski's offer. Those items that were discussed at the October meeting were reconciled and are now included in the city's revised offer that is part of your packet. Those items have been agreed to by the developer. Of the multiple items that we worked through, there are still 3 to 4 major unresolved items. Those include parking availability, the traffic impact analysis, and what I would also group in that category are the cross easements related to vehicular access. Number 2, off-site improvements. So that's anything not on 0.88 acres, improvements that are due to operational consequences of the restaurant and on the 0.8 acres will have an impact on the surrounding property. So there has been no resolution to the costs associated with those improvements. And last but not least is the unresolved interest of joint signage, should there be signage on Mequon Road as access to the property. The council, as part of the packet, has the benefit of a chart that was authored by the city attorney that identifies the resolved items between the 2 offers that you saw in October and the notes associated with the unresolved items. As well, in your packet are full final versions of each respective revised offers. And in addition, at our October meeting, the council was made aware of a second offer made by Locre Companies, who is the relatively new owners of the MTC1 development at the intersection of Cedarburg and Mequon Road. The details of that offer are provided to the council under a confidential memo by staff. Staff has met with Locre since that receipt of that offer to better understand their intent and goals, and we've tried to outline those for you. As part of the council agenda tonight, we have afforded the council the opportunity to deliberate the terms of either offer in closed session, should you choose to do that. And then I guess I just will reiterate the fact that we're here to address, and as well as the city attorney, address any further inquiries that the council has as we continue to have discussions about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. This item involves both resolutions 3480 and 3479. And there are some people who wish to address one or both of these, and so I will call on them at this time. Nancy Urbani, sorry.
Hello, I'm Nancy Urbani. I'm a resident of District 8. I'm here again to speak in favor of demolishing Logan Center and paving it over for parking. The first offer to accomplish this was Foxtown Ventures. They proposed the demolition and paving as well as many other enhancements and upgrades to our entire civic campus. Foxtown is still willing to participate in these goals, provided there is not a restaurant where Logamin currently stands. Lockery Companies is offering to purchase the land. They are financially motivated to see more parking in the area to allow the TC1 businesses to survive and hopefully thrive. There is a chance, I believe, under this offer that the city can still own the land but have assistance in the demolition and paving. So this sounds like a fabulous offer to me. I don't know all the details. I have never been to a fun, walkable community center that did not have a section for public parking. Sure, parking is not beautiful, it's not money-making, except for the fact that it allows visitors to come and spend their money. Logamin Center is nearly hidden by the cemetery, which is ideal for parking, not ideal for a restaurant. I would dearly love to see upgrades to our community pool, playground, and baseball field. Foxtown Ventures can help us do that if we choose wisely and do what is right for all of Mequon. Think about how nice it would be to park for the taste of Mequon and not have to take a shuttle from the high school. Central public parking could help us do that. Think about how nice it would be to pull into the library, especially in the summertime, and actually park close to the library. Central public parking could help. I choose to believe the parking study, both the textbook analysis and the actual on-site counts that tell us that we need more parking. I choose to believe that we did not spend that money in vain to find that out and that the results are true and accurate. I support local businesses. I support them by standing with the existing businesses at Town Center 1 and saying that we need more parking now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Urbani. Charles Friedland.
Good evening. Excuse me. My name is Charles Friedline. Live at 3130 West Celeste Court for 11 years, and I'm also the commander of the American Legion post that's located within the TC1 zoning district and everything. I speak not only on my own behalf, but also on behalf of the Legion. Excuse me. A lot have been said about the amount of parking and everything like that, and like the previous speaker, I agree with the conclusion that the restaurant is not really the best thing to put there. We have a hall that we have to rent out to be able to get money income to pay our bills, to support our veterans and to support the community. We've been losing quite a number of possible hall rentals and everything due to the fact that there is grossly insufficient parking. Now, we can accommodate 200 people, 150 really comfortably and everything, and you can imagine how many extra cars come in there, especially in an evening. Now, I know some people in the past have come in and said, well, gee, there's plenty of parking in there. We can put a restaurant down there, and there's still going to be a surplus all the time. Wrong. Perhaps the person who wrote in the newspaper and another one who made a comment last month and everything like that has looked at it at many different times. Perhaps many different times than I've looked at it, which is quite a bit. Constantly having a problem with parking. I urge you to look at it from another standpoint, and that's financial. Not so much the near-term financial possibility, and I emphasize possibility, of increased tax income by having a restaurant down there in the location of the Logamin Center and everything, but look at it at the longer-term thing. You've already lost a couple of tenants out of MTC1 for a number of reasons, not the least of which was parking. One was the Leo and Lou place, and the other one was the furniture store that never moved into the east end of the north building. Thankfully, there are now people occupying it, everything like that. But where are you going to put the people that are going to want to park their cars if there's a restaurant down there, only up in the lot? The other thing is, what happens when that restaurant needs to be sold because the person who's going to put it up is a little bit too old to handle it? You've got the probability of some more loss in MTC1 if that restaurant goes down there because of the parking situation, and you've also got the probable loss under those circumstances of additional tax income. Put the parking lot down there so that you can help the existing MTC1 survive, not the restaurant. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedland. Carrie Queamy.
Well, good evening.
My name is Carrie Ann Queemy, and I'm a resident of Mequon, living in District 8. Tonight, our community eagerly anticipates each one of your votes in moving Mequon forward, and we ask that you vote no on the restaurant proposal. Please weigh in on the parking study results and the corroborating staff report showing that there is not enough parking for existing uses. And even with expanding and reconstructing the lot to create more spaces, there is still not enough parking for a restaurant. Furthermore, please hear our public opposition to the restaurant. While we residents with young families are unfortunately logistically challenged in coming here tonight to represent our desires as it's bedtime, we speak for the majority and the future. To give better voice to moms and families in favor of park upgrades and opposing the restaurant, we circulated a petition and garnered 283 signatures. Lashinsky's counter-petition, piggybacking off of expected park upgrades, only acquired 137 signatures. 283 versus 137. Bottom line, we believe that the Foxtown parties are still very much interested in park upgrades. However, if former Alderman Lashinsky's restaurant moves forward, Foxtown's plans will not advance. It would not make sense. You ask, what are the incentives for Foxtown's moving forward? Because these longtime residents believe it's the right thing to do for Mequon. I recognize Foxtown's disincentive with the passing of time, the forced marriage with former Alderman Lashinsky's restaurant, and their refocused energy, but press that park upgrades would benefit our larger community so enormously, as well as the future of our community and next generations. Please vote no on the restaurant and do what's right for Mequon. And if the city is unable to retain ownership of Logamin Center, then vote in favor of low-key TC owners' offer to purchase, to remove the Logamin building and install a new parking lot on the property, vital to keep current businesses alive. Thank you for your time, invested interest in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Query. And last but not least, Mr. Lashinsky passed out an outline and wants to comment on the offer to purchase.
Good evening. First, I want to thank the city staff, city attorney, and the mayor. Our community development department creatively produced a conceptual plan that takes a city parking lot with 60 existing parking stalls and transforms it into a parking lot with 86 stalls using the same footprint. In addition, these 26 new parking stalls are located where they are needed most. Our city attorney helped negotiate a deal per the council's direction, including but not limited to compromising on gap insurance. Mayor Abendroth helped champion the preservation of the public gathering area and green space in my proposal, opposed to adding a few additional parking stalls. Next, I want to thank the council. I know from experience this can be a thankless job. I continue to believe this council will do what they think is in the best interest of the city. As for today, it's important you know this. Since November, I've been under the impression that the council is committed to this proposal. The proposal was unanimously approved in November 2016. Then in February, the majority of the council moved it forward with priority over Foxtown. Then there were two closed session meetings, one in March and one in May, regarding considerations. The council directed staff to get an appraisal in May. Then in June, staff informed me that the council changed some considerations to my offer. No deal breakers, but still no appraisal. At the June Common Council meeting, a new consideration for sufficient parking was ordered. More staff meetings over the summer. In September, I invested in a formal counteroffer per the council's directive, even though the appraisal didn't exist. In October, the vote was tabled, and I was asked to work with staff and finalize details. I have done everything the council has asked and more. It's important that you understand the 5 things I did not concede to thus far. However, I am open to discussions. you will find in today's agenda on packet page 166, Exhibit A. Originally, the city attorney highlighted 38 paragraphs for discussion. 33 of these discussion items have been resolved. 5 remain unresolved. I have also agreed to all of the WB-15 issues. The 5 remaining unresolved conditions are, number 1, and you can look at Exhibit A and go through those, the ones that are not shaded out. Parking availability contingency. Packet page 210, number 11 in my offer. Primarily, the differences in our offers have to do with the different proposed site plans. I've explained how mine has a pedestrian bike path through the property, the city's does not. The city's site plan shows 4 parking spaces directly in front of the entry. My plan provides sufficient parking with a more functional layout. It seems the biggest difference in this contingency is the city will finally have to decide if there is sufficient parking. The city continues to argue my site plan cannot be approved because parking will encroach on the cemetery. When you measure the area, you will find my layout falls 2.5 feet short of where the current parking abuts the cemetery grass. In other words, my plan encroaches less on the cemetery than what currently exists. Number 2, traffic impact analysis. This is tricky. I think it's a waste of $20,000, but I'll agree to it if necessary. If you knew the history of these reports, you'd think it's a waste as well. I have thoroughly researched the last 3 TIAs contracted in the town center area. As a businessman, it's disheartening to see how wasteful these expenditures were. Bottom line, city staff and the developer ultimately decide on the functionality of each site. Number 3, cross-access and parking easements. Packet page 211, number 15. Staff says I have no agreement. In paragraph 15 of my agreement, it's there in writing. Please also note, I agreed to a 20% smaller footprint of the property, which ultimately included 31 parking stalls and the building. The city owns and controls the entire driveway and road. In my offer, I have a cross-access easement for bike pedestrian access and a maintenance easement for the Renicky Field outfield fence, as well as light towers. I have no control over vehicular access, but with the ongoing town center expansions, I'm quite certain there will always be public access. I assumed public access. Number 4, site signage. I thought the consensus at the last council meeting was that I would be allowed to have my own sign. Alderman Strelchek led that discussion. Maybe I'm mistaken, and I'm willing to continue to negotiate that. Number 5, off-site TID improvements. This paragraph, number 20 in the city's offer, completely contradicts the preceding paragraph, number 19. In the city's offer, packet page 193, number 19, I wholly agreed to the entire paragraph, including the language, such agreement shall require that seller design, bid, and construct the parking lot for the property and the civic campus together, with the buyer reimbursing the seller for the prorated portion of all costs for improvements necessary. In paragraph 20, it states, buyer shall, at buyer's sole expense, design and construct any public off-site improvement deemed necessary to add parking off-site. I can't agree to both paragraphs. They contradict one another. And in paragraph 20, the city's language is extremely broad, including, I would be responsible for any, and I repeat, any off-site improvements deemed necessary. I am being asked to write a blank check. In conclusion, I have been willing to accept almost every term established by the Common Council. If signage and a TIA are necessary, I will agree to those terms as well. Thank you very much. And I guess I'd like to know if anybody has questions.
I'm going to take this to the council. Thank you. John. We've heard a lot of presentations on this issue over the last couple of months. We have debated the parking, and I'm sure we all have our own opinions on parking, so hopefully we don't really need to talk about parking tonight. The city attorney has concluded negotiations with Mr. Lashinsky. As you've heard, there are some things that Mr. Lashinsky was unwilling to do, and there is some difference in the two offers. But now it's time that we make a decision, and we have Resolution 3480 in front of us, and I would look for a motion from somebody.
Remove it from the table.
Excuse me?
Remove it from the table. Wasn't that tabled last time? Don't we need to remove it from the table? So I'd make a motion to remove it from the table. If you like that. First.
Well, are we?
We're still in committee of the whole,
looking
aren't we?
for a recommendation at this point, coming out of committee of the whole, or are we out of the
Yes.
committee of the whole and moving
Well, we
forward?
tabled it, I thought, in committee of the whole as well, even though, or we tried to and it didn't.
That I don't recall. I'd have to
Well, it won't hurt to
Minutes.
take it off the table.
Make a motion, take it off the table in case it was on table, so we're doing everything properly.
It was second.
Okay. Motion and second to remove from the table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Motion on Resolution 3480.
Second.
Pardon me?
Move to approve.
Motion to approve and a second. Is there discussion? Alderman Meyer.
Can city staff explain to me the item 5 on the conditions that came back from Alderman from Mr. Lashinsky, stating that the two paragraphs contradict each other? The 19 and the 20?
I'm not in receipt of whatever was passed out. I am assuming it means the details between
Maybe
the construction of the parking area
No, maybe the city attorney can. Thank
and
you.
the, okay, sorry.
No, that's fine. No, I can certainly speak to that. Effectively, what the position is that in paragraph 19, the language itself talks about, and I just have to make sure that I have these in the right order, so I'm just rereading through it here quickly. That effectively, there are certain things that we have required of all developers within the town center TID district. And some of those items, just as we have agreed to do with, for example, the Spur 16 project, will be things that the developer may be responsible to do, but we nonetheless share a cost in that. The example that I can think of, at least of Spur 16, was some of the parking improvements along Bunt Rock Avenue. Were a cost that they are installing, but we are sharing in those costs. Paragraph 20, on the other hand, talks about additional requirements that may be necessary as part of the the approval process. And the argument is that that language says that buyer shall at buyer's sole expense install those and pay for those. The argument being is that those are inconsistent. I can't pay for it on all of it in one case, but split the costs on the other case. And so that language, you'll see within the city's offer, or version of the offer, we have language that says, except as provided in paragraph 19, that tries to distinguish between those two things, that they are separate, distinct categories of improvements that are or may be required. Now, there may be an additional objection, and it's not one that Mr. Lashinsky has necessarily forwarded directly, but that the language of paragraph 20 is a little bit broad and was kind of intentionally broad to begin with no real response from Mr. Lashinsky other than just, well, they're different. Certainly, we could tighten up that language within paragraph 20 to provide him some ability to walk away. Once those items are identified and specified, we could. It's hard to project sometimes what Plan Commission may or may not require in terms of some of these offsite, improvements, but certainly we could attempt to even try to identify those at the front end. Now, again, that's a little bit hard to do because it's not something we directly control as staff, or something within the code. But certainly at a minimum, the ability for him to, get a list of those things at whatever point that list is ready, and to look at it and say, you know what? I'm not okay with that. I walk out. So I don't know that I agree that there's an inconsistency between the two paragraphs, as has been alleged, but certainly it could be tightened up a little bit. But again, without any response from Mr. Lashinsky other than just it's inconsistent, we just kind of stuck with where we were at, because there are things that we have required developers to do that are off-site that we don't participate in. And some of those things would be identified, Ms. Allison, from, like the traffic impact analysis. There may be, some additional signage, for example, on Mequon Road that, identifies that it's one way or something like that, or, a turn lane. I'm not saying that that's going to be required here, but, on other projects, the TIA might indicate that a turn lane may be necessary to be added to the road. Those types of things are off-site, but still nonetheless the developer's responsibility. And that's what paragraph 20 is really designed to cover, are those types of improvements that may be necessary.
And that's customary in all agreements?
Yes.
And I think the existing town, or the current town center projects, the Town Center 1 and Spur 16, both have things that they have to do that are a result of traffic study, and in some cases landscaping that has to be put in the public right-of-way in conformance with town center plans. And it's not on the Logoman Center property, but it's part of that project that needs to be fulfilled. And we do that on a regular basis with developers.
That's correct. Those types of improvements have been negotiated with each developer, and typically they have been constructed, installed, and paid for by the developer, and then reimbursed by the city if it's beyond certain improvement areas. I think we would get to a greater level of specificity at the time we had a site plan and a set of building plans that were going to Planning Commission for approval, and then development of a development agreement like we have with all of the other projects, with that approved site plan in place to be able to make some distinctions. And as we all know, and continues to be some differences on locations of parking, ownership of parking, public parking versus dedicated parking for the operations yet on public property. So I think there needs to be, if this were to move forward, I think there needs to be further discussion about each of those different types of circumstances or variables. I mean, there's a suggestion that 19 stalls would remain on city-owned land, yet be dedicated for operations. And so I think that's a different circumstance than public spaces outside of that area, not dedicated for the use.
Alderman Worth.
Well, I would have thought that was part of the negotiation of the purchase agreement, that would have been clarified in the process of the purchase agreement, that, what rights is he purchasing, and what obligations does he, if this were to be approved, I'm not assuming it's going to be approved, but that what rights is he purchasing and what obligations is he incurring. I can tell you, I would have a hard time representing any buyer. It might be different in those two big projects you talked about where there was millions of dollars of public participation. But I would have trouble representing any buyer agreeing to paragraph 20 without some sort of parameter, some sort of qualifying language of the type of improvements, the fact, it doesn't even say that are necessitated based on his construction. It's simply you'll pay for it. And if it's deemed necessary to add parking off-site, where is that? I just think it's way too broad, way too vague. And so I understand the concern with the language. I would have hoped that it would have been worked through to this point, and if Mr. Lashinsky wasn't offering better alternative language than we would have. But I do see a little inconsistency, even when you say except as, well, it talks about the civic campus. Which are the ones that may be shared and which are the ones that he'll pay for? And there's no general description of what that is. So I see some language issues there. I also would perhaps take issue with something the mayor said before, because the city attorney has said it's not true. They're not done negotiating. The negotiations weren't over. It just hasn't gone further. I think these are still largely nits. Well, that one's actually fairly significant and should have been better worked out. The rest of these are things that are language changes that could easily be worked through. Traffic impact analysis is also a $1 issue. It doesn't get to the bigger picture of whether or not we want to do the project or not. These are 5 nice points, or whatever the number is. Those are things that two parties who are interested in doing a deal can come to resolution on.
Alderman Strelchak.
I did lead the discussion on site signage. I think it's irresponsible as a city to put a $1.5 million building in and not allow him some type of directional signage from Mequon Road to his site. If there's space to do it, it can be done without impeding traffic and creating a safety issue. I think that's just a no-brainer that staff should agree to that. It's bad business. He's tucked in behind a cemetery. He's in the campus civic center. He needs signage to
We offered signage.
Okay, good. So, and then off-site signage, if there's some other off-site signage that he'd be partnering with, he should contribute to that as well. It's all or nothing. My biggest question is and always has been, the parking availability. We've paid somebody to do a traffic report, and the traffic report said that the parking was insufficient. We've had people from MTC1 come forward, argue the point that the traffic is insufficient. We've had the Legion come every single meeting, saying that they're struggling, that they don't have enough on site. It's a challenge for them to operate the Legion as it is, let alone rent it out. I mean, they literally have to shuttle somebody from that lot to their site in order to effectively rent it out, adding an expense to renting a facility and making it more challenging for them to flourish. Can you highlight because this is being viewed by the public and this is going out, can you highlight where we're at on the parking? So we're still in a disagreement on the amount of parking. We need to vet that through. Do we have enough parking? Do we not have enough parking? Is his staff parking on-site or off-site? Is that part included in the parking counts? Again?
There was a chart provided as part of your committee of the whole staff report that provides an evaluation of the Lashinsky offer, the city's counter to the Lashinsky's offer, and breaks that down with multiple qualifiers, I guess, to give you an assessment of what the end result would be. And it also breaks it down by whether you choose to allow for additional spaces along the interurban trail. And based on our analysis, and there's some assumptions that are documented as part of that chart, that there is a resulting deficiency in parking spaces, both under the Lashinsky offer and the city's counter to Lashinsky's offer.
Can you highlight for the public that's watching tonight the amount of the discrepancy?
The resulting deficiency under the Lashinsky offer if you choose to include 20 shared additional stalls along the Ozaki Interurban Trail, which is not at this time recommended by staff, is a deficiency of 72 to 87 stalls. If you don't include the 20 OIT spaces as proposed by Lashinsky, that increases to a deficiency of 92 to 107. City's counteroffer to Lashinsky's proposal with the inclusion of those expanded 20 OIT spaces is a deficiency of 37 to 52. Without the additional 20 OIT is a deficiency of 57 to 72. And if we choose to not move forward with operations of a restaurant and we consider some level of increasing the parking supply in lieu of a structure, the opportunity to increase parking supply ranges anywhere to the net positive of 34 to 69. Keep in mind that the maximized parking lot concept plan that staff has shown is one of many iterations that we've gone through on opportunities for uses and parking in this particular area of the Civic campus. The one that we've shown strictly maximizes parking. It takes no other priorities into consideration, including pedestrian features that we think are critical, or at least the planning department would think is critical in terms of creating comfortable, secured pedestrian connection between the parking areas, and not only MTC1, but the public streets that we hope to connect this public parking to, because Town Center is not just about MTC1.
Agreed.
Alderman Hawkins.
First of all, I agree with Alderman Strelchek's comments on the signage that the Lashinskys ought to be able to have their own sign out on Mequon Road. With the staff proposal that the city needs to point out that, hey, the city campus is this way. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But I'd like to make a couple of observations. The first one is that tonight's committee of the whole asks us to consider Mr. Lashinsky's offer or the Lockery Company's offer. A couple of people from the public mentioned the Foxtown Ventures proposal to raise funds for the pool, the park, and the diamond, baseball diamond, but they're not being considered tonight. And I think that's actually what we've been doing for 10, 12 months, is not even considering the Foxtown proposal, because they just haven't been around. I don't know if they're still serious. A couple of people from the public said they are, but only if there's no restaurant. I think it's very telling that they're not on the agenda tonight. Now, don't get me wrong, I think Foxtown folks are exceptional. I hope their project across the street with the brewery is a fabulous success the way it looks now. It looks like it's going to be a fabulous success, so I wish Foxtown all the best on that. But I haven't seen or heard from them in months on what they propose for Logan. So if I were to go back 12 months, I would not have voted for both Lashinsky and Foxtown, because if I'd been able to predict where they were going to be, they haven't been here. They just haven't been here. In fact, one of the guys who does raise funds for Reineke Field has said he has a very difficult time raising funds for, that's just Reineke Field, not even the pool or the park. But we're being asked at the last minute, basically, to consider the Lockery offer, which, God bless them, I appreciate their offer, but I'm not going to consider it tonight. I think we put Mr. Lashinsky and his family through all kinds of hoops, and we ought to make a decision with them one way or the other. I personally think they've answered most of the questions that we've raised with them, and I'm sure we're going to have other discussions about the particulars of that. But I would hope and it seems like we're already doing that. Nobody's talked about the Lockery offer yet. And how long have we been talking about this? 20, 30 minutes? I don't think we should be talking about the local offer until we've made a decision one way or the other with the Lashinskis. I hope we go ahead with the Lashinsky proposal. There's just a few more details to iron out. I'll have more to say, but that's what I wanted to open with.
Alderman Bushy.
I'm definitely in agreement with what Alderman Hawkins said. I'd also like to step back and looking at this as an overall process that predated my being here and seeing the step through, and again, agree that this is the offer that's in front of us. And I was actually taken aback by one of the things about parking, talking about unmarked graves being put in here. I don't recall seeing that before. If there's any concern for human remains there, it should be done in a way that other places, Frederick Hospital encountered them, that they should be moved and properly buried. I don't see how that should be part of our decision-making process, the possibility of unmarked graves here. And I also agree that the local offer should not be here when we've been discussing this, and even going out, if something doesn't transpire with the Lashinsky offer, that would be put out for RFP, not going right to the local offer right away.
Alderman Carroll.
I've been coming down here now for about, it's getting close to 4 years. Coming to City Hall, I drive by here all the time. Like to say the old adage, seeing is believing. I drive by the Logaman Center all the time. 1 to 6 cars. Tonight there was 1. Tonight there was 1. There are, the employees don't want to park there. It's a long walk from the town center. They don't want to park there. Patrons don't want to park there. Staff doesn't want to park there. The lot's empty. The lot sits empty, and it sits empty, and it sits empty. Again and again and again. Putting a restaurant in that lot isn't going to affect Mequon Town Center 1, the square, at all. Those people don't want to park there. There are plenty of parking spaces in that area. Look at it, with the layout is. There's plenty of parking spaces over there. The other thing is that dead old building over there could be a vibrant family-style restaurant for the families. So, I know Mayor Abendrust, we're not going to talk about parking, and Alderman Strelchik did, so I just had to say that. And you were called on to give your point of view, but the lot's empty. He's going to add 20 to 30 spaces to that and add a number more spaces. People who park over there are going to be people who park at Lashinsky's restaurant. You don't get the spillover from Town Center 1. The employees won't go over there. The patrons won't go over there. The staff doesn't park over there. It's an empty lot, and it's there again and again and again. I don't know what kind of parking study can tell me any different, because seeing is believing.
Alderman Nervin.
I drove in a little bit later tonight than Alderman Gill, I guess. I pulled in about 6:30. Swung through the Logaman, there were 13 cars parked there. The lower lot next to City Hall was full. Thought it was rather odd for a fall weather night, but I decided to give it a go. So here's where my head's at. It is all about the parking. Sorry, Mayor. We'll talk about parking. I will cede you that when the parking study was done, there were a couple of vacancies in Town Center, so we don't have that captured in there. Presumably, most of that can be covered by expanding the existing city lot. I guess you're down to believing whether or not you believe that the restaurant will really take only 70 spaces or not. And it's possible, but I think one of the big reasons we got into this mess with Town Center 1 is we believed only the developer's input on what parking would be required for Town Center 1. And we kind of fell into that as the city going along with it because we wanted the deal to happen really bad. And it didn't work out in the end. There's parking challenges. I'm not saying any of them are insurmountable. So could you put a restaurant there? I think you might be able to and get it to work. The people that lose still are the American Legion. They're going to be totally out of options. We're never going to put a multi-million-dollar parking structure, multi-levels back here. Just let's be honest, that's never going to happen. I can't see a path towards that getting approved. If we tear down the Logaman and build it out, that lot will be empty a majority of the time. I think the data backs that up too, so we're left with a couple of lousy choices. Put more in there and hope for the best. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. I think the Legion still loses. They're going to lose either way, because the parking's just not where they need it. Or you build the lot out and you add more parking, which still leaves some challenges getting people to where they actually want to park. This area is just so challenged. We talk about the cemetery. I'll just throw this out there. How much longer do we want a cemetery there? It's not a good place for a cemetery. It's in the middle of a bustling town center.
Don't go there, Andy.
Probably
It's
was.
not going to happen.
It's
The dark path.
you fast forward 20 years, it'll come up again. It's a lousy resting place for those people. I just don't know how much more you can jam in here without taking risks. I think you might be able to pull it off, but I'm unsure that I'm totally confident in the parking figures from either side. The study's probably a little overinflated. I'm not sure I totally buy that the restaurant's only going to consume 70 spots. I think we heard something similar from the restaurant that's in town center now, and they obviously consume far more parking than that. So there's more risk than reward for putting it in.
Think ahead 20 years, I think ahead 10 years. Think of the future, what the future holds for the city's civic center. I don't believe the city should be selling land in the civic center to a private entity for a private use. This land should be available for the public to use as part of our civic center. It will be needed in 10 years, 20 years. It will be needed probably before that to accommodate improvements to the park. We need to improve the park. We need to improve the pool. And to sell off a portion of what little land we have available to accommodate that is a mistake. We need to retain the ownership of that land and use it for public civic purposes. Restaurant can go anywhere in the community. There's lots of available places in the community for a restaurant. So I think this is a bad idea, that the restaurant should not go here. This resolution should be defeated. Alderman Strachek.
I just struggle with the commentary that we're evaluating the feasibility of putting a restaurant in based on the fact that the parking lot sits empty now. The parking study was done based on what the restaurant needs to operate successfully, how much parking they need to have, their staff, and I truly believe staff should be parked, on their site or nearby. Off-site security on staff on a restaurant of that size is just irresponsible, unless they've got deeded land. The study says that there's not enough parking on site. There's not enough parking on site. So when that parking that's not enough on site with the allocated amount of spaces that's being requested by the developer here encroaches in on the additional shared parking from Town Center 1, we're now going to be encroaching on their overflow parking as well to support a restaurant, making a parking situation even more challenging. A restaurant of this size ideally is packed all the time. A restaurant of a Lashinsky quality that they're going to put in the community is ideally packed all the time because it's probably going to be an excellent asset to the city. I just really feel like, and we've had so much exhausting discussion on this that we've talked this to death, and it's the parking. We're trying to put something that's too big in a space that's too small, according to a study that we paid for, according to staff reports who we hired to review this stuff, to be experts on parking. I want Lashinsky's to build their restaurant in the city as well. I'd love to see it. I'd love to take my family there. I'd love to support it. But I don't feel that this particular spot can support a restaurant of that size and not negatively impact Town Center 1. We are also responsible as a city to preserve the value of Town Center 1, preserve the cross value of Town Center 1 with Spur 16, and now the new proposed Foxtown across the street. I mean, this is city planning. We're not planning on one little segment things. And if we are, our feedback from our experts that we hired, there is not enough parking to support it in that spot. The parking is the key for me. The parking is what I struggle with. And, you know, and while I'm talking, I'll try to talk a little less, and I'll just mention that, you know, the Locry offer's great. I don't want to vote on it tonight either. I want really staff to appropriately vet this. If we don't move forward with this tonight, I'd like the Locry offer to be reviewed. I'd like to go through it a little bit more thoroughly, and I'd like to vote on it another night. It's just not appropriate to review it tonight. Lashinsky's on the table tonight, win or lose, and then we move forward as a city after that.
Alderman Meyer.
Question is, on the offers here, which one are we voting for? You've got Lashinsky's offer, you've got the city's counteroffer, and are we voting for just his offer? Are we voting for this? Are we voting for a combination? Are we saying that if we vote for it, we're voting for it with these contingencies not being resolved? So what are we doing?
It's a good question. In fact, is a question that I myself was going to pose at some point here because of that. Let me just add, with respect to the 5 issues, some thoughts that may provide some clarity as we look to answer that question of which one. In other words, I think that the answer probably is it's not really either one of the ones that are in the packet, but instead, based on even what we've heard this evening, some mashup thereof, even based on the little bit that we've heard thus far. The first is the parking availability contingency. I don't disagree with any of you that at the end of the day, if you're going to move forward tonight, you have to have some level of comfort that the parking that's being proposed is going to work out. I think we all agree with that. Now, where you fall on that spectrum is going to be different. I'm hearing some that think it's not going to be a problem. I'm hearing some that think it may be a problem. You know, wherever you fall on that spectrum, you obviously need to get there to make your vote, however you're going to vote tonight. That said, when Mr. Lashinsky says that the issue as it relates to the offer here is a difference between the site plans, he's wrong on that. The issue really ultimately, because if you vote to move forward, we're going to go forward, and if you don't, you don't, and yes, that's going to impact how you vote to move forward or not, but the issue really with respect to the offer itself is whether or not you, as the council, as representatives of the city, have the right to subsequently say at some point, wait a second, I'm kind of feeling like we were maybe sold a bill of goods here, and I'm not happy with the way that the final site plan has come forward, and I'm not happy with the parking situation there. There are a number of things that can happen as part of the approval process. You've got landscaping issues that need to be addressed as part of the parking lot requirements. You've got potentially grave issues. Maybe you don't have grave issues. You have the issue of whether or not you truly have enough space to do what he wants to do anyway. There are all sorts of things that potentially play into that. And I believe, and I told Mr. Lashinsky that I was going to tell all of you this, that if you approve an offer that doesn't give you the right to review that, in light of almost a year's worth of arguing about parking to this point, you're foolish. That's not something you should do. You should have the right to review that once we know what that final site plan looks like. Because while it may very well be exactly as Mr. Lashinsky proposes, the reality is that as part of the approval process, it most likely will not be. And you need to know what that impact is going to be on the parking as it sits there. He can say, yes, I can point to 70 spots that I'm going to provide, plus the 20 shared spots along the interurban trail that'll be shared parking spots. But we don't know as we sit here today whether or not that is actually what is going to be approved. Let's say he only gets 60. Does that change anybody's mind in terms of whether or not the parking situation is okay or not? What if it's less than 60? We don't know. And so I think you need to make sure you keep that contingency in place. You guys can argue about whether or not it is sufficient to move forward tonight, but I think you want that contingency in there. And thus far, Mr. Lashinsky has said he doesn't want it in there. Traffic impact analysis. I think you heard Mr. Lashinsky say this evening he's okay with that. He doesn't like it, but he's okay with it. He's willing to go along with it. So that would be a change from his offer, or you leave it in our offer, however you want to deal with it. Cross-access easements, the issue there is that he says he does agree. It's right there in his offer. Well, he's right. He does agree as it relates to pedestrian and bike access across his property. And while I agree that perhaps access to his lot seems kind of silly, because where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. The reality is number one, we don't know what the future holds. So, for example, there have been some proposals that suggest that there may be a road that goes on the other side of the baseball field. Now, whether that's realistic or not, I don't know, but it certainly could happen. At which point we may want to have access through his lot for the purposes of accessing that road. Likewise, and for his protection, we don't know what the future holds. And to the mayor's point, in 10 years, 20 years, this community is probably going to be a lot larger than it is now. There may or may not be sufficient space to handle the staff needs that you would need at this point. So while we all sat here 5 years ago and said Logan's not going anywhere, it's going to be there, we're now looking at getting rid of the Logan site. What happens in 20 years? We say, hey, you know what? We need a bigger building for City Hall. We're just going to move out altogether and we're going to sell the land here. Now it's not public access anymore. It's something that protects him. More importantly, it's also consistent with what we've done with Town Center 1. We've got cross-access and cross-parking easements there. It's appropriate to do it here. As it relates to signs, I certainly wholeheartedly, and Ms. Tollefson said, we give him the signs. We understand that he needs to have a sign on Mequon Road. Staff's belief is that that should be a shared sign. There isn't enough space for us to put two different signs in that location. It should be one sign, it should be shared, the cost of that should be proportionally split appropriately. No.
Because that's the language that's in there, it doesn't say how it's split. I mean, the language is incredibly obtuse.
The risk is small, I think, on that.
How about the frontal
I think you
area
should
of
have
the
a
sign?
freestanding sign.
Yeah, I mean, typically you would do that based on the relative percentage of space that you have. So if you have 60 square feet versus 40 square feet, 60%, 40%, in terms of the cost.
It's a contract. Doesn't he need to know at least how much sign he can get?
I think he should have his own signs.
According to the code, he's not allowed any.
It's his own.
I understand that, so we're making
And
an
it's the
exception.
planning commission that makes that decision, not the common council. You don't have authority over the common council. Sorry.
And it should be
Over the plan-
contingency.
Over the plan.
He's given a sign of X.
Well, again, arguably, he has that under the review period language that gives him the ability to, as part of the site plan review, walk away once he has that. But certainly, to your point, we could clean that up to say specifically that it would be proportional based on relative sign percentages, on a square foot basis. Certainly is appropriate, but we are nonetheless in a point where I just don't think you can get two signs there. So if you want to give him a sign and only him a sign, recognize that that's probably to the detriment of putting some sort of city sign in that location as well. And then the last one, I've already talked about a little bit, and don't know that I need to repeat there. And I know Alderman Worth has some thoughts on that as well. So.
And again, we shouldn't sell land in the Civic Center, regardless of any of this. We just should not do it. Don't do it. Alderman Hawkins.
But can you answer Alderman Meyer's question?
In terms of which
one? What do you suggest or we should vote on?
Well, my suggestion would be specifically that you would vote on an offer that would include our language on the contingency for the parking availability, meaning that the city has the right to do it. We've already agreed that we will keep the city's language on the traffic impact analysis. As it relates to the cross-access easement, again, for the reasons that I said, that, consistency and everything else, that we would look to use our language on that. The signs, I'm willing to concede that we would, if there's consensus that we're going to have a shared sign, to do that on a per square foot percentage basis, to do that, or in the alternative, whatever the decision is.
You're kind of suggesting the motion would be to approve our offer subject to potential clarification of number 4 and 5.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, just so we know what we're ultimately voting up or down on.
Now, I mean, the question would be whether or not and I can't read my notes here, whether Alderman Hawkins and Alderman Garrell would be in agreement with that particular motion, since you are the mover and the second. But that would certainly be our recommendation. So.
Alderman Hawkins.
There's been quite a bit of discussion about the Civic campus, and I think that's absolutely appropriate. I would guess that none of us can predict the future, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years from now, but we can evaluate the past. And if we go back 30 some odd years, evaluating the Civic campus at this particular location, we had many civic organizations taking advantage of the Logan Center. And when it came time to shut the building down because it was too expensive to maintain, every single one of those entities found an alternate location either within the city, or some, like the Historical Society, went to Thiensville, which is fine. Many of the other activities, though, were able to be transferred to some of our public schools, to the public library, to the many, many public parks that are available. So again, evaluating the civic campus and what's available in the city for future civic uses, I think the city is large enough and has the resources to accommodate all the activities that have been involved at the Logan Center for 30 years, and I don't see a problem with putting in a restaurant. As a matter of fact, every time I have thought about the Backwoods Pub, it brings to mind Wrigley Field. If anybody has ever been to Wrigley Field in Chicago or watched it on TV, the outfield, beyond the outfield, there are people who rent out their lofts and their apartments outside the outfield of Wrigley Park so that they can look in on the ball games. And this restaurant just reminds me of being an addition to our Wrigley Field, which of course is Reineke Park, which would provide families an opportunity to not just Mequon families, but families from out of town who are coming to see their kids play baseball, a chance to watch it in a very nice restaurant, in a very nice environment. So I think the restaurant absolutely would contribute to any civic campus activity that the city can't accommodate somewhere else, either in the public schools, the public library, or the parks. Next point, in the traffic study, had I been in charge, and I tried to argue with our traffic study person, and I don't think I got anywhere with him, but one of the tests I would have required would have been to say to all the employees of the Town Center 1 businesses, restaurants, and other dental facilities and others, to require your employees to park on Cedarburg Road or somewhere else. And I think 50% of that parking lot is occupied by employees. And
You have any
actually,
basis for that?
the local people have underground parking that they could sell to managers or doctors for a fee. So I think our parking study was flawed, and I think the Lashinsky proposal is going to be fine with parking. And I think there are things we can do as well to accommodate the Legion. That's all I want to say right now.
Alderman Meyer?
I'd like to make a motion to include in any offer here the city's language of 1, 2, 3, and then 4 and 5 to be included, but language worked out.
I'll second that.
What was that, 3 and 4? All of them, but the language to be worked out. Can you repeat that?
Are you asking them?
You made a motion.
I made a motion.
Amended?
Amended.
Okay. Any discussion?
So we're voting on the motion.
No, the amendment.
To include these.
Just clarifying what the motion is.
Yeah. I'm just making sure that we're all voting on the right thing.
Call it all.
Alderman Worth,
Yeah, aye.
Alderman Garrow,
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins,
Aye.
Alderman Schneider,
Aye.
Alderman Urban,
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak,
Aye.
Alderman Bushy,
Aye.
Alderman Meyer,
Aye.
Mayor Evandross. 8 to 1.
Okay, so the motion's been amended. You ready to vote on the motion? Alderman Worth?
I don't know that I've ever had a vote where this particularly one that's gone back and forth for this long, where I sit here and I still don't know where I'm voting. I just want to point that out. I think that having a bridge between the two town centers, a development would enhance the town center and make it a better place. I think that the concept of a restaurant is a wonderful idea. I think the contract issues can all get worked out. So I guess I disagree with the mayor a little bit, but I get back to, and I know somebody said we're not talking about parking, but I get back to parking. And while I'm not certain that I can reconcile or go along with what the consultant came up with, even if you take a more conservative view, and you say you don't need the 15% surplusage or vacancy, you need 10%. And I've gone back and forth with Mr. Lashinsky trying to understand where do we replace those spots? And I keep getting double counting. He's going to use 20 spots along the interurban trail, but he's using those. But we're getting rid of 47 spots in the Logan parking lot. And while I agree with Alderman Giro that sometimes when I go there, nobody's there, I also know that on one day they counted and it was, in fact, at the count, there was precisely the right number of parking spots right now. on that day, that what we have is precisely the right amount if you're going to say, 10% vacancy. And while that may have been the busiest day of the summer, I don't know that, but I've been there plenty of times where that's where I've ended up parking. And yet we're going to put a use in the Logan Center that has a peak busy time, at least from what I understand, at the same exact time that the peak exists for the rest of Mequon Town Center. And on nice evenings, I had to park there a couple times for city council meetings, and those are Tuesdays. Yes, there are some replacements. You've got 16 city parking spots that weren't accounted for, 8 of which we've already stopped using, 8 more of which we could stop using and move those cars. At least I've never really heard a good reason we can't. We've danced around the issue, but I've never heard it. Yes, there are some spots that can go along the first base side, but I don't think that there's as many as Mr. Leshinsky believes because of electrical boxes, because of the configuration there. And yet we have to move the city cars somewhere, so they probably go there. You've added a few spots there. The city staff did a good job on the Civic Campus, adding some spots there. But I still can't make it add up to the 47 spots we've lost, and 47 spots that we lose doesn't account for the fact that you hope Mequon Town Center has some growth. You hope that those additional people who moved in are, they're going to add some traffic that wasn't there when we did the counts. And we never talk about, we talk about it, but we never talk about how we resolve the issue that we helped create with respect to the Legion. And clearly we'll never resolve that issue if a restaurant, at least I don't think we will. Maybe we will, but I haven't heard a solution. If a restaurant of this size is built there. So we keep saying, well, you can put a few more along the interurban trail, but that doesn't really work for the Civic Campus or for the, works for, and that's probably, we need to make sure that that access is there, because I agree, under our code, 70 parking spots for a restaurant that size is somewhere between a third and half not enough. Now, do we often, in working through these projects, approve a little less parking than what our code says? Yes. But not when we already have a use right next door that's got a parking problem. So if 70 spots isn't enough, Mr. Leshinsky's parkers clearly are going to probably want to park in the Civic Campus lot. Just adding congestion to the city campus lot. I want to vote yes for this. But nobody, I don't know that staff is really trying to get us to yes. And Mr. Leshinsky, I keep getting numbers from him that don't quite add up. And examples that don't quite work. But they sound good. First base side, well, but how many do you really get there? And we haven't had surveys of anything. So we don't really know how many we can get, what kind of paths we can get, whatever. This is all guessing and shooting in the dark. So I'm still not sure sitting here how I'm going to vote. If I vote, it's only because of the language of number 1. And that should make Mr. Leshinsky feel pretty uncomfortable, because we go forward, but we're going to have this argument all over again. And frankly, we had 2 little survey monkey things that weren't enough to really tell you what the city says. Every day each time we have a meeting, I get 10 emails for and 10 emails against. And I don't think there's a consensus in the community on whether this is good or bad. I think if it could work, it would be a great thing there. But I don't think we should exacerbate the problem. And I wish we had, instead of Mr. Leshinsky giving us his analysis and we trying to give our analysis, knowing the problem that this parking is, I wish he had stepped forward and said, here, I've got somebody else who's an expert on parking, and here's what they say that's contrary to what our experts say. Because I do think there's some fatal flaws. They didn't count the indoor parking spots. They did it on the busiest day, not on the days they told us. We can, most of what Mr. Lashinsky said at the last meeting, a lot of his criticism, not all of it, but a bunch of his criticism of the study is well-deserved. And besides that, it's a study of 3 days. What does that tell you? And instead he goes back to the books, which studies often a parking lot, 3 parking lots that give you a number. When you actually read how the Bible is put together, it's not some heavily intensive, representative sample type study. So we're stuck making a guess. And I think the city will forget the fact that there wasn't a restaurant 5 years from now, but the city will never forgive us if there is a restaurant and the problem is much worse than it currently is. So if this goes forward, it can only go forward with some better assurance of parking. And we don't have that today. So if you vote yes, the responsible thing to do is voting yes based on the parking availability contingency. Everything else is your gut reaction. And so anyhow, it's a long way of saying I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
And if you think a restaurant is a good idea and a family restaurant is a good idea, just make sure you realize that 10 years from now, 20 years from now, in the future, that might not be a restaurant, might not be a family restaurant, might not be a restaurant at all. I mean, future uses, city gets a right of first refusal with actual definition and requirements to negotiate the future uses. Mr. Lazinski will sell this property to somebody else, and they may well want to do something else with it. You don't know what you're going to get 20 years from now.
Well, you're
not approving a restaurant. You're selling city land to a private entity.
Period.
Bad idea. Alderman Garrell.
I'm not a lawyer, I'm a mathematician, and I've gone over these parking numbers again and again and again and what they look like, and I'm very, very confident there is enough parking. We had made a big mistake with Mequon Town Center 1. And that square doesn't have enough parking, it never will have enough parking. There's a problem with the American Legion also with the parking. But you can't add any more parking inside that square unless you actually build a large parking structure at $25,000 to $60,000 a stall. I heard one from Taddy at $60,000. I heard other ones at $25,000. So you're not going to solve the problems there. We made a big mistake. The city made a big mistake with the parking there. The pendulum swings. We're swinging way over to the other side, now way over evaluating the parking. It's just a big, giant pendulum. Now we're way over. No, we can't do that. We can't do that. Adding a restaurant there will will create a vibrant community. Go walk out there tonight. Take a look at that lot. Dark, and then tearing down the Logaman Center and adding another 55 or 56 to 66 new parking spots. We have a giant blacktop parking lot that nobody wants to park in because it's not close to anything. That's what we would get. We put out an RFP, and we got an offer. If we weren't going to sell the property, we should never put the RFP out there. Should have never been done. Adding a restaurant will help create a vibrant community. I've gone over these parking stalls and these parking numbers again and again and again. I don't want to see 5 or 10 or 15 years from now, Mequon Town Center, we got a we got to keep that parking lot over there. You're just going to have a big black empty spot that you can drive by every day and have another 56 to 66 more empty parking spaces. He's only got 240 seating capacity. Tables are 4 apiece. Families come to it. And I'm going to go to it again. 240 divided by 4 to a table is 60 families, 60 spots, maybe 70, is what you're going to need. Going forward, I don't want to see a big black parking lot sitting out there. I agree with Alderman Hawkins, it's going to create something. And the more you have people filling up a parking lot or coming to an area, the more people are going to want to come there. It's just the way it works. So this is the only restaurateur, only business I know of, and it's not even in the town center. It's over in the Logan lot, so it's well far away from the Mequon Town Center 1. He's too far away for most people to want to go to. That he said he's going to actually lease parking across the street for his employees. Wouldn't it be nice if everybody at Mequon Town Center 1 went and leased parking for their employees? You might not have a parking problem. In fact, you wouldn't have a parking problem at Mequon Town Center 1. We have let this pendulum swing from one side to the other, and I just see that if this restaurant isn't approved, and you put a parking lot there, you just exacerbated the problems of the city of Mequon and this, because we are making a big mistake on the other side by not approving this restaurant.
Alderman Worth.
Well, I don't know how many employees are parking there. I do know that some of the employers tell their employees they're not allowed to park there. Some don't. We're making lots of assumptions about things we don't know the answer to.
That's somebody else's property.
What?
That's somebody else's property across the street.
Oh, yeah. But I agree with you. I think it would be nice. First of all, I don't think we should make it all a parking lot. If this doesn't proceed, this is not a binary choice. It's not a choice between a restaurant and a big paved parking lot. There are other uses that could be made of this property. I still think a restaurant would be a nicer use. But nobody's actually written down and showed how this works as far as parking. I mean, it just, you may have gone through the numbers, but nobody shared it with everybody else. I can't follow it. And I've spent hours and hours on it. So, yeah, I don't know what to do.
We have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
No.
Alderman Nurbin.
No.
Alderman Stralchuk.
No.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
We're still in the committee of the whole, right? Aye.
Mayor Avendroth.
No.
5 ayes and 4 no.
The motion goes forward.
As amended.
And we'll go on.
As amended.
We'll reconvene as a common council. And we'll go forward to resolutions. And the first one is 3480.
I have a question. Well, I guess we need a motion first.
Do we have a motion?
To reconvene?
Pardon?
To reconvene?
No. We're in resolutions, item 12. First one is resolution 3480. It's the same thing we just voted on.
You're in committee of the
But now
whole.
we have to vote on it
Well,
as a
move to-
common council.
So you need a motion to approve? I so move.
Or
It's your common
deny.
council.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion and second to approve. Call the roll.
Oh, discussion.
We just had discussion. Go
Well, I
ahead.
have another question.
Okay.
It may resolve how I just vote here. I have a procedural question. Where and when would this come back to us to determine, number one, Or would it only go to the planning commission, which I'm also on?
Certainly is one of the, I guess, unspecified parts of the offer. I guess it was anticipated that upon site plan approval, that would be conveyed to the council, and if there were folks that were concerned about it, that they would then look to put that on an agenda. Certainly, we could propose an amendment that would say that we would, within 10 days after, or after site plan at the next council, take up the issue or something like that specifically. But I think it was intended that because we didn't know. I mean, it may be that, as part of the site plan approval process that he gets everything that he wants, or maybe they get creative and we get even more spots. I don't know how we do that, but that ultimately would be the council's kind of decision to bring that back, but we could certainly work in something that would mandate that in some way.
I think I'd like to see
Mayor?
that decided tonight.
Mayor, it was my intent that after planning commission approval, there would be an automatic review by the Common Council of understanding what the approved site plan included in terms of parking requirements as it relates to the contingency in the offer.
Well, would that go back to us? We don't normally review
That's
site
not
plans.
normal course, yeah.
No, it's not, but there's a contingency in this offer about parking availability and
The
your
contingency
review.
provide for the council to make that decision, or the planning commission.
The planning
It's-
commission ultimately approves the site plan and has that authority.
But what is the contingency? provide?
Contingency says the seller, so presumably that would be this body as the representative of the seller. Has that ability to make that decision. But to Ms. Tollison's point, if the desire or thought was that we were going to require some review of that site plan by this body, I think we would want to amend the motion to include language that would reflect that specifically. That, something along the lines of, at the first meeting following the site plan approval, that the council would then take action on it.
Is that a friendly amendment to your proposal?
Sure, yes.
Mr. Olchek?
I struggle with the fact that we bring it back on parking. I think we've got it all fresh on our minds right now. We've been through this exhaustively. We don't agree. I mean, Alderman Worth, you essentially said in your discussion that there isn't enough parking, and we still don't have a solution after it's been a known issue for several months. I mean, this is a multi-month, year-long process where from the beginning, the parking was a highlighted thing. We needed to get through the parking from the acceptance of, even reviewing this when we had Foxtown and we had Lashinsky in front of us at that date. We've been reviewing parking ever since. We've debated this, ever since. I think we're putting too big of a piece in too small of a spot. I think that it impacts Town Center 1 parking. I think the overflow goes into that overflow lot. I feel that we're literally ignoring the Legion. I mean, we're ignoring the Legion completely. And there's not one of us that'll disagree that he's got a parking issue, but again, you're exhausting his overflow parking. You're exhausting the Legion's overflow parking by putting something in here, because that's where people are gonna park. They're gonna park either at the destination they're going or in between the two. They're gonna shop in Town Center 1 and at Shinsky's place. They're gonna park at one of the two or right in the middle just to go and meet, depending on what their pattern is. We have a civic campus. Our city's not shrinking. It never will. We're gonna have an increased need for parking over the next 5, 10, 15 years. That parking is only gonna be, a little bit more of an issue. We're trying to grow our festivals committee. We're trying to grow our city festivals and have in and on-site parking. We have no allocated lots. This is our one allocated lot in that civic campus where we have our parking for Taste of Mequon. That event grows every year, and we're not going to make a decision based on one day a year, and so don't get off on track on that statement. But all the reports that we have say there's not enough parking according to our calculations. According to staff calculations, who's hired to do this, who's done this, for how many years have you been with the city, Kim? Plenty?
15 years, but
15
obviously
plus years,
worked
she
other places.
evaluates parking and comes back with recommendations for planning commission. The person that we retain and we've had for 15 years is telling us we don't have a parking, and it's not a gap of 5 stalls, it's a gap of multiple stalls, more than 20, more than 30. The traffic pattern that comes here, if they can't park at Lashinsky's restaurant to eat at that restaurant because that parking lot's too full, they're going to pattern out of returning to his restaurant. He's not going to be as successful. Same thing with Town Center 1, same thing with Spur 16. This is a parking decision. This really should and absolutely should be decided tonight. You know, we highlighted how it's been an exhaustive process, so now we're going to send it to the Planning Commission and then review it again and go through the same thing. We're gluttons for punishment. It either fits or doesn't. It's all about the parking. And give them a sign if you approve it. Give them the damn sign if you approve it.
That's also the Planning Commission's jurisdiction. Call the roll.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
No.
Alderman Nervin.
No.
Alderman Stralchuk.
No.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
5-3, 5 ayes.
3, motion passes. Resolution 3479.
Move to table.
We just approved it.
Second.
Motion second to table. Call the roll.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nervin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Resolution 3479 is tabled. We have no unfinished business, no petitions, memorials, remonstrances, and communications, no specified miscellaneous new business. We have closed session 3. Convene in closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren E, Wisconsin State statutes to deliberate or negotiate the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session, possible easement acquisition for the East Trunk Sewer Project, and B, convene in closed session pursuant to section 19.
Don't we need to individually vote on these?
Yes.
Have to take individual votes on this?
Yeah.
Okay. Call the roll.
Well, can you tell us which one are we voting on? A. A is
East Trunk Sewer Project.
Okay.
Alderman Nervin.
Aye.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
All right. Convene in a closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren G, Wisconsin State statutes, conferring with legal counsel for the government body who is rendering oral and written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the body with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved, claim of the Lakesville Park Condominium Association.
Your Honor, I need to recuse myself on this item. My partner is representing one of the parties.
Motion in a second. Go into closed session.
Second?
Aye, second. Either
Okay.
way.
Motion in a second. Call the roll.
Alderman Stralchuk.
Aye.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins. Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nervin.
Aye.
And convene into closed session pursuant to section 19.85, paren 1, paren C, Wisconsin State statutes, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governmental body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility, and that is the personnel evaluation city attorney contract.
Move to go into closed session.
Second.
Motion and second, call the roll.
Alderman Bushy.
Aye.
Alderman Meyer.
Aye.
Alderman Worth.
Aye.
Alderman Garrow.
Aye.
Alderman Hawkins.
Aye.
Alderman Schneider.
Aye.
Alderman Nurbin.
Aye.
Alderman Strelchak.
And we're going to closed session, and we will not be back.
We're never coming back?
Take a 3-minute break.